What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again talking college football. And today we are discussing the Iowa Hawkeyes ahead of the 2025 season. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel. Those are two easy ways to help a small channel like this. If you like the content, and if you've done that, thank you very much. It does help a lot. Can't overstate that. We are recording this on May 16th, so the portal is still open. Iowa's not the most active team in the portal. I'm not sure they'll add anybody, but if they do, just a warning. And otherwise, if I miss something in the video, please leave a comment. Let me know what it might be, what we can get better at. Always trying to improve the videos. But let's dive into Iowa's roster ahead of this year. Actually, first, we'll take a look back at what Iowa did last year. It was another successful season for the Hawkeyes. They finish 8-5. They have a strong track record, at least in the last couple of years. They've reached double-digit wins in 2 of the last 4 seasons and 3 of the last 6 seasons. They actually haven't had a losing record since 2012. But importantly, this team showed some important growth in a few key areas, mainly on offense. I was shocked to see that this offense improved from 131st to 32nd last year. There is some nuance with that, which we will discuss, but this Iowa team seems to be moving in the right direction overall. And if you look at the season, it was full of highs and lows, some pretty weird lows, actually. As far as the wins go, they had a lot of blowout wins. The only victory that was within single digits came against Nebraska in the second to last game of the year. And of their losses, basically, they were all also single digits except for Ohio State. And a lot of them they should have won. The Iowa State game, they were winning that game the entire time. And it came down to a second half touchdown, and then they bombed 2 field goals to win the game in the final seconds. That was Iowa State, that is, a game that Iowa arguably should have won. They lose to Michigan State in a weird contest, and I realize now I made a mistake. There were 2 games they lost by double digits. This Michigan State game, they lose 32-20. This could have been worse. Michigan State kicked 6 field goals in this game. And it was actually just a very weird outing overall for Iowa. Probably their most disappointing of the year. And then the UCLA loss, that was one where they had 3 turnovers, which is odd. You lose to at least 2 of the worst teams on your schedule in UCLA and Michigan State, but then you beat teams like Washington and you crush them. You beat Wisconsin 42-10. You beat Nebraska in the second to the last game of the year. You beat Iowa, or you lose to Iowa State in a very close game. A lot of close competitive games for Iowa throughout the year. But as we dive into this coaching staff, Kirk Ferentz, he's been there since 1999. His record overall is 204-124. They haven't had a losing record since 2012. And whether he was forced into these decisions or not, their coaching staff has improved. In the first season under Tim Lester as OC, they made a seismic jump in offensive efficiency. They still couldn't throw the ball very well, which you can see on the screen. They were 98th in passing, 118th in receiving. But one thing they did do well was erase some of the negative plays and play to their strengths. The offensive line was amazing. The rushing game had Caleb Johnson, and they had some depth pieces there that played extremely well. Compared to expectations, this offense definitely improved. Maybe you could argue they weren't quite 32nd overall. That seems a bit rich for me, but there's no denying this team just flat out scored a lot more points. We saw them put up 40 points in 4 games, albeit one of them against an FCS team. They scored at least 30 points in 2 additional contests, 29 in another one. The offense was undoubtedly better, and we're still getting a lot of the same production on defense from Phil Parker. They did drop from 4th to 11th in defensive efficiency, but we're still talking a top 12 defense in the country. This is an elite team. If Iowa starts to maximize offense at all, look out for this team. Let's look at recruiting and talent acquisition for Iowa. They are not the best recruiting team in the Big Ten. It's a hard place to recruit to. They are more of a talent development team. They maximize the players on their roster. Their retention is awesome. Very good retention going back 2-3 classes now. 86% of last year's recruiting class is still with them. The only blip on the radar there is they did lose a 4-star tight end in Gavin Hoffman, but it's a very deep position. The 2023 class is still largely intact too. They're recruiting very well and retaining very well, I should say. Transfer portals up and down for them. In 2023, they were 46th. Last year, they dropped to 130th. This year, they're back up again at 58th, so they're kind of patching holes with the portal, which honestly brings me to the roster right away. We have the biggest transfers coming in at quarterback. This is our data usage tool looking at the 2 deep depth chart. It's available in the Discord, which the link is below if you'd like to take a look. They added a lot of transfers at QB. They're in yellow on the spreadsheet. The experience is in the next 30 tabs, the year in school, the snaps the last 2 years, their recruiting ranking in terms of stars, and then a value score, which looks first and foremost at your recruitment. Then the more you play, the less it looks at recruiting, the more it looks at on-field play. Think of this maybe like a Madden rating for players, trying to judge just how good they are. All the other team dynamics are to the right, who they lost, incoming, outgoing transfers, and whatnot. But at QB, they don't add just one. They don't add just two. They had 3 transfers. The presumed starter is Mark Granowski, the South Dakota State transfer. He has 4 years of starting experience, and here are his career stats. 63% completion percentage, 10,272 yards. That's 8.6 yards per attempt. 93 passing touchdowns, 20 interceptions, 60 big-time throws, 27 turnover-worthy plays. Extremely mobile. Last year was his worst rushing output, and that was 380 yards and 7 touchdowns. I mean, this guy is elite on the ground when asked to do so. He also has played a couple high major teams, Power 4 teams. Last year, they faced off against Oklahoma. He threw for 264 yards, 7.3 yards per attempt. It's never an easy jump from the FCS to the Big Ten, but man, for an FCS transfer, he's answered every question. The only question I now have is, can he sustain this for a full Big Ten season? If it doesn't work or he gets hurt, which has been a problem for Iowa, especially when McNamara was there, the constant injuries, turning to Deacon Hill and Jackson Stratton and Brennan Sullivan. They bring in Hank Brown. He comes from Auburn, played a little bit last year, completed 63% of his passes, 9.4 yards per attempt, 6 touchdowns, 3 picks, 3 big-time throws, and 3 turnover-worthy plays. The only concern I have with him is youth, and a lot of his production came against New Mexico and Alabama A&M. He threw for 235 against New Mexico and 96 against Alabama A&M. And he only had 403 yards in total, so that's about a little over 3/4. And if it's not him, which I think it firmly will be him as the backup, he's actually been running with the ones a little bit too. But they also bring in Heklinski. He comes from Wake Forest. 644th ranked prospect last year, 40th ranked QB, hasn't played much. And they actually retained Jackson Stratton too, the Colorado State transfer. He played a bit last year and looked pretty decent. The only concern really was 3 turnover-worthy plays to 1 big-time throw. This is the deepest QB room, I think, since I've been alive for Iowa. I can't remember a room that was this deep. There are other teams that have had decent QBs like Nate Stanley and whatnot, but man, there's a deep QB room, and it's much better than anything Iowa's had like the last 5 years or so. Running back, they move on from Caleb Johnson. He obviously gets drafted. LaShawn Williams hits the transfer portal. They return Kamari Moulton and Jazian Patterson. Moulton is a sophomore now. He's 5'9", 197, rushed 84 times last year for 473 yards. That's 5.6 yards per carry. Not much pass catching to his name, just 1 catch. Patterson, 63 carries, 309 yards. That was 4.9 yards per carry. Also a bit of a smaller back, 5'10", 195. He's been with Iowa for a while now. These two are expected to share the backfield at first glance. Wouldn't be surprised if one of them could carve out a larger role. They also have Terrell Washington Jr. I think he's going to play more running back this year. He split his time between RB and wide receiver last year, 5'10", 206. So he's actually a little heavier than both Moulton and Patterson. He had 12 carries and 6 catches last year. And then the last player to mention, Brevin Dahl. Don't think we see a lot of him unless there's injuries. He's mainly been working as a gunner this spring, but at least a name to mention in the backfield. Iowa generally is having pretty good rushing attacks, and these players will be behind a good O-line. Wide receivers, not a position of strength. Still, they were outside the top 100 in total receiving efficiency last year. There were some injuries, but they do return their top 2 wide receivers in Jacob Gill and Reese Vanderzee. Gill is a senior now. He spent 3 years with Northwestern, came over last year to Iowa, caught 35 passes, 411 yards. He's a boundary receiver, and the first thing I'll say with that is Iowa's generally playing with 2 tight ends, so you have to play on the boundary for the most part. He does kick in the slot a bit when they do run 3 wide. 66% of his snaps came out wide. 1.58 yards per route is fairly decent for this team. Reese Vanderzee is back. 6'4", 207 pounds, played a lot as a freshman, boundary receiver, 14 catches for 176 yards, 1.11 yards per route as a freshman, which is lackluster, but he was also hurt, dealt with an ankle injury that caused him to miss some time. I don't know if this is just Iowa fans, but people were comparing him to Randy Moss. I never thought that he was that, but I mean, now the hype is sort of cooled. If we get a more productive second year out of Reese Vanderzee, I think this wide receiver room can be a little better. Their next three wide receivers, returning, Seth Anderson, Jerry Bowie, Dayton Howard, all single-digit receptions. Anderson's a former zero-star recruit, but Bowie and Howard are now three-star sophomores. At least something to be mentioned there. Bowie and Howard have good size, both above 200 pounds. Anderson's a little bit smaller. He's a former Charleston Southern receiver who transferred. So that's pretty good depth. They also added a Chattanooga transfer in Sam Phillips, who's 5'9", 185, caught 50 balls last year, has over 2,000 receiving yards in his 3 seasons with Chattanooga, played on the boundary as well, which seems to be something Iowa prioritizes. If you're pure depth, just names to mention, KJ Parker, redshirt freshman, Terrence Smith as a freshman, both names to monitor. Caden Wetchin's still there. He played 80 snaps last year. This is a pretty decent receiving core for Iowa. It hasn't really been strong the last couple of years. Kind of the crown jewel of 2 transfer cycles ago. Caleb Brown never hung on the roster. He's now with UAB, transferred out, the former 4-star. So we'll see what we get. I'm a little optimistic it's going to be better than last year. Hopefully injuries don't occur. Tight end, never really a question for me with Iowa. They do lose Luke Lachey to the NFL. Johnny Pascuzzi transfers. Gavin Hoffman transfers to Missouri. He was a 4-star last year. They have a good returner in Addison Ostrenga. Played 265 snaps last year, but actually played a lot more in 2023 when Lachey got hurt. 6'4", 251, had 31 catches that year in 23. Good blocker, so that's where this starts. I then think Zach Ortworth is probably going to play more. He caught 11 passes. He's 6'3", 240. Pretty good as a run blocker, too. Again, I was going to run a lot of 12 personnel, so we're going to need to find snaps for 2 tight ends. Ostrenga's locked in. Ortworth is probably the second guy you'd look to, but there's multiple players that also could get on the field. Michael Burt played 4 snaps last year as a freshman. He's now a sophomore. 4-star freshman Thomas Meyer comes in. They also have Hayden Large. He's technically listed as a tight end on the roster, but he can play fullback. He's more of like this versatile chess piece that they'll use a fair amount, largely just a blocker, however. I'm never going to doubt the Iowa tight end room, especially with Ostrenga up at the top. I think this is a pretty good unit. Offensive line, they do lose 2 studs in guard Connor Colby and tackle Mason Richmond, but they've got so much experience, 3 locked-in starters, and plenty of talent to replace Colby and Richmond. Left tackle is one of the positions up for grabs. It looks like Jack Dotzler and 4-star sophomore Trevor Lauk are battling for this position. Lauk played 23 snaps. Dotzler played 16. There's tons of hype on these two in the spring, especially Lauk. The talent is in place for Iowa to just keep rolling at left tackle. Maybe there's a slight step back because Richmond was a stud, but I'm not expecting it to be drastic. Left guard, they get Bo Stevens back, former 4-star, played 612 snaps last year, just 7 pressures allowed, no sacks, good run blocker. He's locked in. Center, Logan Jones is back. He's now entering his 4th season as the starter, his 3 years of starting experience. Took a huge step forward last year. 5 pressures allowed, no sacks. Left guard and center, just such good players between Stevens and Jones. Right guard, it looks like it's going to be 3-star sophomore Caden Piper, but senior Michael Myslinski is in the mix here. Piper did play 108 snaps, played a lot against Northwestern last year. Even though he didn't play a lot, he didn't allow a single pressure either. So Piper, I'm expecting him to be a pretty good replacement for Colby. Right tackle returns Jennings Dunker, now his 3rd year as a starter, 13 pressures allowed, but he was the best run blocker on the team. Iowa's also strong as far as depth goes. We haven't even mentioned redshirt freshman 4-star Cody Fox and Will Nolan. They added a Ferris State transfer in Bryce George. He had 38 starts at the D2 level and All-American down there. I don't think they need him, but I mean, I'll take that as a depth piece for sure. This is an elite offensive line, expecting this unit to be around the top 20, if not better again this year. Defense, a couple questions. Their turning over a little more than normal, but this unit just year over year has been so good. Off the edge, they lose Deontay Craig, but they return quite a bit in the depths, starting with Ethan Herquette, 660 snaps from him, 290 from Max Llewellyn, 255 from Brian Allen. Herquette was a monster last year, 34 pressures, 7 sacks. He just needs a running mate. He was also fifth on the team in tackles with 56, 12 tackles for loss, just an insanely productive season from an edge. They don't get a lot of opportunities to lead the team in tackles or anything, but 56 is a great number for an edge rusher. And then Llewellyn, a guy who's played in rotation for most of his career, he had 35 pressures on 290 snaps. That is absurd rate stats. Behind him, Brian Allen, he didn't play quite as well, but still 15 pressures if you're going to use him as a rotational player or in a pinch. It's a great unit. Behind them, Kenneth Merriweather played 7 snaps as a freshman. They also have former 4-star Joseph Anderson on the roster. This is a very deep edge unit. Inside, they lose Yahya Black, but they return 612 snaps from Aaron Graves. They also get 247 from Jeremiah Pittman and 51 from Will Hubert. Graves was the best defensive tackle on the roster last year, and he actually had very strong pressure numbers from the interior alignment, 26 of them. Great run defense numbers. He's 300 pounds, so he can stack up there. Pittman struggled a little bit in a rotational role, but Hubert played well on his snaps. So I think you're just kind of looking for a running mate alongside them. There's also some depth pieces who could play. They bring in Ios Epinesa, 4-star. You may remember the name, brother of AJ. They also have Bryce Hawthorne from South Dakota State. He was a rotational player in the FCS, so I don't think he'll play a ton, but you never know. I think the edge group is a little stronger inside, but Graves locks down that inside, and you're just looking for a running mate there. This should be an awesome D-line. At linebacker, Iowa has to replace studs Jay Higgins and Nick Jackson. They're the two most experienced players now at linebacker are Jaden Harrell and Carson Scherer. Both are former 3-stars. I think Scherer is a little bit more promising. He had 12 tackles on 50 snaps, only played in 4 games. Harrell played a little bit more, but didn't look great when he was on the field, just average numbers for him. The biggest endorsement I think this unit received was not adding any key transfers, though. Previously, I was brought in transfers, like Jackson was a transfer. So them standing on business with their depth and elite recruiting and whatever experience they have in Harrell and Scherer, I think is a kind of an unsaid praise for this group. They also have a couple other guys worth mentioning. Jaden Montgomery and Landon Van Kickericks have been with the program for a while. They have 2 4-star second-year players in Cam Buffington and Darren Weiskopf. I think that's truly the ceiling right there. Overall, there's 4 4-stars with this unit. They're all just super young. Again, the 2 second years in Buffington and Weiskopf, a couple incoming 4-stars in Berkey Goucher and Carson Cooney. The talent isn't proven, but it's certainly there. We're talking 4 4-stars plus a couple experienced players, at least somewhat experienced, in Harrell and Scherer. I'm expecting linebacker to be fine. Maybe just a slight step back without the experience, and perhaps it takes a few games to get going. But it's a very talented unit. Defensive back, they lose safety Sebastian Castro, corner Jamari Harris. Don't want to mix him with the linebacker Harrell. Anyway, the much larger loss is Harris. He was their best corner last year. They do have a couple experienced corners, TJ Hull and Deshaun Lee. Both of them have played well at times and then had their struggles at times. Lee has been the starter for the better part of 2 years. He did begin last year as a backup, but then he started the final 9 games of the year. He was better in 2023. Last year, he had a 70% completion allowed. He allowed 3 touchdowns in his coverage. Still had some of the on-ball production, 4 PBUs and 1 interception. Just looking for a little more consistency out of Lee. And honestly, we can say the same thing about TJ Hall. He played 452 snaps last year, and he was benched for a short period of the season. He was excellent in run defense, but 53% completion, allowed 2 touchdowns, 3 PBUs, 1 interception. As long as we can up the consistency a little bit, I think this unit is going to be pretty good. At slot corner, first of all, Iowa does some weird stuff. For example, their second and third most snaps in the slots were linebackers. That was Jackson and Higgins. So they're sometimes just jamming a linebacker into the slot. If you're looking for a pure slot corner, I don't think there's a clear starter right now. Sophomore Zach Lutmer is probably the most likely candidate. He's at least the most experienced. 91 of his 155 snaps occurred there. He was basically just average, but young player now entering sophomore season. Perhaps he plays a little bit more. There's a few other options that maybe play in the slot too. Jalen Watson played 32 snaps last year. Shaheed Barrows comes in from South Dakota. He started the last 2 years, but really weird profile on him. Absolutely elite numbers in 2023, but took a huge step back last year. In his 2024 stats, his production came in the 49th percentile. Iowa's also been known to move players around, so I'm very interested to see where Kyle Kolarek plays. He's been receiving a lot of hype this spring, been moving between safety and linebacker. He certainly would be undersized if he's a linebacker. But again, they will park their linebackers in the slot sometimes and use these hybrid players. So Kolarek could be a candidate for that. I think this decision will come down to summer play. At safety, Xavier Nwankpa's back. He played 461 snaps last year, which was a lot fewer than 2023, where he played 838. He also had a lot better numbers in 2023. His completion percentage jumped from 54% to 83%. He also had 0 on-ball stats after he forced 2 PBUs and had an interception in 2023. He's extremely athletic. I think Nwankpa's a large bounce-back candidate. I'm not really worried about him. The other safety should be Cohen Entringer, too, who played 265 snaps, had 1 start against Michigan State, above average across the board, only allowed 78 yards, and it did an interception. Entringer should play opposite Nwankpa at safety. And they also added Ty Hudkins for Purdue. Just played 9 snaps last year, but he was a freshman. So the Purdue transfer probably likely a depth piece, but we'll see. Overall, this defense is just full of good players. Kicker and special teams. Expecting Iowa's always among the better special teams units in the country. They returned Drew Stevens, who was the 4th most efficient kicker in the country last year. Perfect on his 40 extra point attempts. Went 20 of 23 on field goals, but every miss he had was beyond 50 yards. And he went 4 of 7 beyond 50 yards. So I was going to scrape some points from drives they shouldn't. That's how it's been with them. Sometimes Iowa's not the most productive offense. Again, they made huge strides, but let's just play this out. If it's a team like last year, which I don't think it will be, I think they'll be better, but you have a limited passing attack, teams can key in on the run. Even if you start with the ball in average field position, boom, a penalty and a halfway decent drive. I was in field goal range, and they can scrape a field goal out of it. So having this kind of range at kicker is important to a team like this, and it's made a difference for them in the past, as I think it will this year, having a kicker this strong. Let's go to their schedule, where reasonable non-con, you have the FCS Albany, usual rivalry game at Iowa State. This year, you're traveling there. UMass, at worst, you're 2-1. The Iowa State game is very winnable. It's on the road, but you can win that game. At worst, you're 2-1, looking at a potential 3-0 start for this team. As far as the top of the conference goes, it's reasonable. You dodge Ohio State and Michigan, but you have to face Oregon and Penn State. I will say both of them are at home, and the Oregon game comes after a bye, so they're pretty advantageous in where they play and what times of the year they're playing these teams. There's a lot of the middle class on the schedule, though. There's not as much of the bottom end. You do face Indiana. You travel to Camp Randall, play Wisconsin, have to face Minnesota, travel to USC in the West Coast, and then at Nebraska on a Friday. So it's a moderately difficult schedule for this team. There's not a lot of the low-end opponents. Even a Michigan State and a Rutgers. Rutgers is a road trip, too. Those games aren't the easiest. But overall, this is a team that should probably win 7 or 8 games minimum. And I think as long as you take care of business against who you should, you're looking at clear underdog against Oregon and Penn State. And I think they're at least going to be close in every other game and sizable favorites in a few of these. 8 wins is firmly in play for Iowa. They could even do better than that. I think you're looking at a ceiling outcome of 10-2 and on the doorstep of a potential playoff berth if the Big Ten shakes out a certain way. You'll obviously need some cannibalization, but this is a better Iowa team than I think people are giving it credit for. Defense is locked in, and I was shocked at the offensive improvements. We'll see if the country is a little slow to adjust to that, especially with the quarterbacks they bring in. We'll see. Could be much better. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Let me know who you'd like to see next. Until next time, We'll see you guys later, and good luck.